Welcome to Designing Hollywood podcast. I'm your host, Sylvester Centina. Designing Hollywood podcast is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals. Today's episode is sponsored by Gianni Inc. Our guest today is costume designer for film and television, Natalie Bronfman. Natalie studied art history, costume, and set design at Parsons School of Design in New York City and at the Accademia di Moda e Costume in Rome, Italy, having completed a dissertation in costume design and history of theater. After completing her studies, Natalie worked in Rome doing freelance costume work in theater and opera, eventually moving back to Toronto to work for the Canadian Opera Company. Having worked in theater for many years, Natalie wanted to branch out on her own and open an interior design company that catered to both commercial and residential clients. As an interior designer, Natalie received honorable mentions for designing restaurants from the Design Exchange in Toronto. Though this job was quite fulfilling, designing for characters was really what she wanted to do. She eventually applied at the IATSE Film Union to commence working in costume design again, this time in cinema. During this, Natalie continuously maintained a clientele for Maison de Couture Edith. Often in between cinema projects, Natalie is found doing runway shows during Fashion Week when the time permits. After 2 decades and countless projects of having worked with some of the top costume designers worldwide and having costume design shows of her own, she was given the opportunity to design Hulu's The Handmaid's Tale, for which she received 3 Primetime Emmy nominations for her work, and also various nominations for The Most Dangerous Game. Natalie has since been the costume designer for the digital series Most Dangerous Game, starring Christoph Waltz, Liam Hemsworth, and Sarah Gadon. And she most recently designed season 2 and 3 of Apple TV's C, starring Jason Momoa and Dave Bautista. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome costume designer Natalie Bronfman to the Designing Hollywood show. Hi, Natalie. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so glad to have you here. So let's get started with that moment when you said to yourself, this is what I want to do career-wise. And how did you get your start in the industry? This is a question that, everybody needs to get. It's so important.
I've wanted to do this ever since I was a very, very young girl. And specifically, I wanted to make clothes for opera. And I had a very wonderfully talented aunt, great aunt actually, who taught me how to sew. And I was already sewing by hand, very rudimentary dresses for dolls and things like that. And the dog, but mostly the dog. And I'm mostly self-taught initially, and then I attended Parsons to unlearn all the bad mistakes that I taught myself, shortcuts and so on.
Sure.
So that I could actually do a proper tailored dress or jacket as opposed to just, doing everything but the pockets, because, this takes time. Who needs pockets?
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuff like that. Or, you do a lining and, oh, damn, I got to build another jacket. So
yes.
Anyway. And yeah, I love opera very much. And I wanted to study opera, but I wasn't really, really great at it. So I would never have been prima singer. So I tried to figure out how I could stay in that world and theater. So I decided to go into costumes more so than the singing part of it. And then the rest is history. And then I studied basically costuming and structure and tailoring and history and so on. So, yeah.
It's funny because also when I got into tailoring and making clothes, when I finally went to school for it, I had to unlearn a lot of the bad habits that you form. You think they're shortcuts, but they really aren't. Right?
No, and it never quite fits right.
Yeah.
It's close, but never quite right. So
yeah, and then there's the hand sewing part. We don't really want to learn it, but then it's so useful. And how could you do it any other way? All right. So your work has inspired many, many people. What films or television shows inspired you?
I like anything from post-war Europe, film noir, Fellini, De Sica, anything that's sort of, I want to say, very dark, but as well very altruistic. So I like the two extremes. I like films in black and white in general. So it's just, and I think that time of the whole world was going through obviously a restructuring, a resurrection, a rebirth. And I think that's what's so wonderful about that time era. And as you go on, even if you look at Visconti films and everything, all of a sudden this richness just starts to appear everywhere, and it's just magnificent. But the film that actually made me really want to go into costume is Amadeus, believe it or not.
Oh.
Yeah. When I saw that, I'm like, yep, that's what I want to do. So I left fashion behind and only concentrated on costume. But the fashion part was great because of all the learning of structure. And that's what you need to know.
Yes. Oh, well, the costume design in Amadeus is certainly spectacular, isn't it? And then the storyline is just fantastic. And who can forget about his laugh, Mozart's laugh throughout the movie? Okay, so that's really wonderful. What genre have you enjoyed designing for the most? And what project would you say is your ultimate favorite that you designed?
It's hard to pick a favorite child, but I must say, I would say probably C, because it was so incredibly creative. Mm-hmm. I had to really stretch my mind to think about how to design things for people who couldn't see. And that made you really go outside the box. And then just the sheer quantity of it became, and I sort of coined a new phrase called dystopian Baroque, because there were all these royal families, but you couldn't actually put jewels on them because you couldn't see the jewels. So it had to be trinkets of like radio diodes and things that made noise. And so I think that creatively has got to have been my favorite. Absolutely. And my very first opera, which, in hindsight now was okay.
Right. You perfect your technique for sure.
Yeah,
as time goes by.
Yeah, you sure do.
Did you take any sort of inspiration from previous apocalyptic movies, maybe Mad Max or anything like that of the sort? Waterworld? Actually,
none. I tried to stay away from all of that because I didn't want it to turn into a cliche of a redesign of something that's an archetype already. But you must admit though, there are only so many ways you can skin a cat. I know that's a terrible phrase, but I ran into that very same problem with Handmaids and the veils. There's only so many ways you can rebuild something. So, there might be things that may allude to that, but I truly tried to stay away from it. I pulled mostly from history, heavily from history, and from mythology. So.
That's great. Yeah, I almost see the echoes of other probably medieval times with the fur and that sort of thing and the leather and.
Yeah, I was trying to play mostly on after the Byzantine times, after the religious sort of hold that everything had. There was a real sort of Iron Age raw roughness to it, and then when we went into the new cities, I could pull from ancient Rome, and then I combined that with medieval Japan. So I tried to pull from not just medieval Europe, but also Asia and Middle East and so on. So that was really fun to. And actually, South America, I have a tribe that I pulled from South America.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
One of the hidden tribes is Mesoamerican. So.
Really? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel that we really don't see a whole lot of South American tribal work and media in general.
Yeah, it wasn't a big, there are 5 tribes, I believe. I'd have to go back now because this seems 2 years ago, but sure. I picked the Phrygians, which is sort of Bulgarian, I want to say is medieval. So I picked them. Sure. I picked North American tribal influences, but we did, for example, the necklaces, we did them with spools of thread because those are things that wouldn't disintegrate in 600 years. So I tried to use the shapes, but morph them into things that we had or things that would be left over.
Yeah.
Mesoamerican ones, we created these chest plates that were woven with metal, like I want to say washers, and then straw, and then they're woven into these armor plates. The headdresses as well, we morphed, for example, a moose, a peacock, and something else together. I can't remember exactly, but everyone had these incredible headdresses. One of them had a big sort of, I think it was a cougar tail. I'm not sure now. No, probably not cougar, but it had a big floral flower that was created. That was the chieftain of that tribe. And then we had the Valiers, which were the tree, I want to say tree people. And that came from Bulgarian pagan. They have these rites that they still do. I had a few Bulgarian ladies that worked on my team and who actually brought in some of these actual objects. So we built it from that, because these people lived in the trees. They would use straw, and that's sort of where that paganism came from. So
Sure.
yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, it's astounding, the creativity. I love it. I'm so fascinated by it. So C is available on Apple TV Plus. You designed the second season, and the story is fascinating. It's about a dystopian future where the entire human race has lost the sense of sight. And this means that society has to find new ways to interact, build, and hunt, ultimately survive. However, all of this is challenged when a set of twins are born with sight. Can you tell us how costume design plays a large role in creating this dystopian society?
I had to, in terms of when I went out shopping or putting together things and designing a garment, I had to use the other senses that they had available to them, anything that wasn't visual. So it had to have either a scent to it, an acoustic element to it, or textural element that they could feel, or something they could smell. Like it was, that's why, for example, the Queen has rings that they would shake, because once you heard those rings, you know that the royal family was walking in the room, so to speak, or the Queen was present. On some of the tribes, we used rose oil to rub into the Compass warriors' leather chest plates, just to give something to the actors. Not that you could see that on screen, but it was just sort of another layer for the actors to help with their character.
So really, there were those really key elements in designing for these characters, right? And I'm assuming that once you were in your meetings with the directors and the producers, this was all discussed and said, okay, we have to make Jingle, her bracelets and her rings have a role in the direction, right? Yeah. So it was very sensorial.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Even the livery in the wedding, when the Queen arrived, Queen Kane arrived to the wedding, her livery had, and that was sort of a bit of a throwback. I gave them kind of tails, sort of, that was the British from her livery. I kind of morphed it off of that, but at the back we had all these little bells and things hanging off, so that you could tell when the livery arrived, the Queen had an acoustical element to her everywhere, even on her people that were directly working with her. So
I see.
Yeah.
So now this society can't see, which is an interesting aspect for you as a costume designer, creating the characters. How did that aspect come into play when making the costumes for the show? Were there any specific fabrics or textures you incorporated because of this aspect of the characters?
Well, we used things that I tried to use things that were unusual. For example, Magra had a coat that was made out of burlap. It's very, very, very textural. And the way we built it, we cut it on the bias, and there were strips sewn in circles. Mm-hmm. And then the sample of that was about 12 by 12 inches. And then I said one day, hey, let's throw it into the washing machine. And everybody was like, what are you doing? I pulled it out, apart from the fact the machine had to be cleaned separately after that. But the whole thing just sort of blossomed and opened up, and it became this textural beauty. And we added little elements of little chains that hang down from it. So when she walked, it had not only this swish sound, but it also has this very light tingling sound.
Sure.
And then on her collar, we had a very large pelt that was sort of like a lion's mane. And that was a sort of a throwback to her being Baba's wife, who was a lion of a man, so to speak. He was, he was
for sure.
So that's how so visually for the audience, that sort of became her coat, her queenly, her ermine cape, I want to say, that kind of thing. It was that kind of an idea.
Nice. So you took over season 2 as a costume designer, and I'm wondering how the costumes evolve with the storyline. There is a progression there, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Luckily enough, on season 2, we had two new cities to build. We had Cervantes and we had Pensa, which was in Paya, which is still in the same country that Queen Kane comes from. But she had flooded the capital, Kanzawa. So, this all makes sense once you watch the show right now. Pensa, they're saying, kind of came from Pennsylvania. So it's that kind of, and I found out as I was doing research, Travante was actually an ancient Roman town in something like, I don't know if I'm not mistaken now, 200 AD England. Oh. So yeah, it was called Triovante, but it was like, it had an allusion to that. So we took that sort of the production designer and I, we were completely on the same page. We hadn't really discussed it, but when I did my presentation and she did hers, it was sort of like we had taken Iron Age Rome and recreated this village, and we were shooting it in this electrical plant that had been sort of abandoned already. I would say 50 years by now, which actually exists in Toronto. So it's
Wonderful.
this amazing structure, and it suited the city so well. Anyway, that was sort of based on ancient Rome in industrial age England, 1880s. So all sooty and gray and mucky and just dark. They had coal mines, and Pensa was sort of the I want to say is more organic. It's a sheep farming community, and so the textures and the tones are much lighter and more natural, I want to say, as opposed to industrial.
So I'm hearing a lot of Rome and ancient history. You must have been researching history, and tell us about that. Tell us about your research process and how you like history.
Yeah, I'm a history nerd. So, instead of watching, I don't know, any kind of reality show, I'd rather go onto YouTube and see, how did the Ottomans happen to be, that kind of thing. So that was what was great during COVID. I got caught up in all of that stuff. So
right.
Usually when I get the script, I mean, this particular script lent itself so easily to that because it was so creatively free from the producers themselves. It was, I just went wild with it. I pulled images from everywhere, from ancient Iceland, which was interesting because one of our lead actresses is Icelandic. And I used some symbols that they have, runic symbols. I love Japanese culture, which happens to be also Jason's favorite. So that was a bonus.
Love it.
So we could really play with the whole samurai hakama kimono thing, and having Edo as his brother, his armor is sort of there's small plates that they had in medieval Japan, and then I morphed that into a Roman medieval Japanese plate of armor. Like it became this mishmash of all centuries, which was just fun.
I love Japanese culture myself and their fashion in particular.
Yeah.
And I have made traditional hakama pants in the past, and they involve meters and meters of strips to tie around the waist. So I'm assuming you had some workarounds to be able to put this on the actors quickly, right?
Yeah, we had no zippers. Everything. Jason doesn't like those kind of things, and nor do I, which was great. And in that sense, we had the same like-mindedness about it. No, it was ties, but they were shortened, of course. And then we had just the big theatrical hooks and bars inside, just so for when he was doing all the stunts and stuff, it wouldn't fall off. But we needed to make so many of them that we had the fabric milled in India via Australia, because it was an annual silk. So, and we needed so many of these pants that each pant is 6 yards or 6 meters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And of course, given that practically that was his only costume at one point in the show, halfway through, we needed, I think 36 we made, or maybe more. I can't even remember the number of everything.
Yikes.
We made his footwear as well. We made everything. So it was kind of, yeah.
It's definitely a gargantuan production, right? There's just so many people to dress. It must be terrifying, I think.
It was.
Just to get everybody dressed and well dressed, not just dressed, but well dressed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with a show like this, I can only imagine the sheer amount of costumes you and your team had to create. And I'm sure you were used to that, since The Handmaid's Tale was also a large production. We'll get more into that in just a little bit, but please elaborate more about the logistics of costume making for the show, and what exactly was the amount you were working with in terms of pieces and people, because there's a lot of extras. There are people running around and lots of fights and all of that.
we had you in the department or outside I'm just kidding. Joking.
Go off.
Okay. Yeah, initially pre-COVID shutdown, I was given 5 weeks to prepare this, which is very little. And initially, before COVID shutdown, we had unlimited numbers, and they were talking about creating 4 armies. So at the that would have been the final battle scene, and they wanted 400 of each army. And I had to come up with 2 of those immediately because they were seen right away. So that would have been Travantes and Penson Paya. So we had those two armies to build, plus all the villagers from both those cities. And they were looking at 500 to 900, depending on which city we were in or what scenes per day. So there was one week where we were out and it was horribly cold. It was minus 20 Celsius, and it was 5 days. And we had close to 900 background every single day. It was plus the armies, plus the cast. It was crazy big. We had an entire old school filled, and all these classrooms were different dressing areas.
So you had tons and tons of costumers everywhere, just kind of, wow.
30, I think we had, if something like that, the number like that. It was so, I couldn't, and it was so funny, there were so many people that I ended up creating red pinafores because I couldn't find anybody. And I didn't know who was who, because we all had goose coats on and we're all freezing, right? So, and I'm like, who's a costumer? You know?
Oh my God.
So it's like costumes in red.
Wow. Yeah, I'm a New Yorker, or I was a New Yorker, and I would go out into the street wearing, shorts in 50-degree weather. And now I'm an Angelino and it's 65 degrees and I have a puff jacket on. You have to get used to these things. So can you elaborate on the battle in episode 8, where the character is played by Jason Momoa? He's wearing a samurai armor, and Dave Bautista go against each other. There were very large armies in that episode.
Yeah. There were very large armies. Their armor specifically, Jason's armor, he loved the Japanese culture, but that actual checkerboard pattern was an ancient pattern that I had actually purchased it. It was a very tiny piece of armor. Like, I don't know who it would fit now, but it was an old antique piece. I mean, we're bigger now as humans, but this actual checker pattern was on this. And he saw it in my fitting room when we had the fitting, and we were talked about it. And I said, well, would you like us to do that? And he said, yes, absolutely. So what we did is we ended up creating the checkerboard with wax, which was really interesting. So the parts are waxed and parts are not waxed. And then it was all broken down. So yeah, that's how that pattern happened. And Ado, for example, has a red gambeson, which is that quilted thing underneath his armor. And that was a throwback or an homage to Julius Caesar. He at one point, I'm trying to remember the history now and what exactly I should have been better prepared for this, but anyhow.
Oh no, don't worry.
It was an homage to Julius Caesar. I think it was in 80 AD. There was a war in the UK in the UK or just somewhere just on the coastline there,
yes,
where he was trying to dupe the other army, and he put on a red cape, and they alerted, they saw the red, thinking there was a problem, and that's how he ended up winning, because his army was alerted beforehand. Otherwise they would have been taken over by the so that's why I decided to make this thing red on Ado's, because apart from the fact he's also such a powerful man, red is such a great color. I love things in red. It just means so much,
It's my favorite color.
Same, Handmaids, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, so that was those two, and then the different armies, we had to create these helmets that they could actually see through, but that covered their eyes. So in actuality, they're covered, but the stunt guys, we ended up having to actually cut out plates because they couldn't, you didn't have perfect vision through it, but, so they would get whacked by accident with each other because they couldn't see it coming. So we had to morph that, and that ended up getting CGI'd in afterwards. So that's how we got around that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's, but yeah, it's also was gambesons, and there were the medieval Japanese plates that on the one side, and then the paeans had a different, it was like chains that were lashed. But because we had to make so many of them immediately, we ended up making molds of them and then poured. So.
See, I was just about to ask you, because traditionally, these things were sort of tied in with little knots and that sort of thing. And so to engineer it for the show, I'm sure you had to come up with other ways that would be quicker and, so things aren't flying around, right? Off.
Exactly. Initially, also, after COVID shut down, we had a little bit more time because the numbers became smaller. So we started making them, we could catch our breath basically, because within the 5 weeks, it was just hard to cough up all this stuff and put it on camera, because everything had to be broken down and dyed and et cetera and built. And we built footwear as well. So it was a lot. All the lead cast had leather armor, and they were actual. Of course, for their stunts, they were then made into something softer so that when they fought, they wouldn't get hurt, and it was lighter weight. So yeah, we had very, very many versions of everything. So yeah.
Impressive. So there's also an episode with a wedding, and it almost seems counterintuitive. Who has a wedding in the dystopian future, I suppose? How do you envision a dystopian wedding?
Let's see. Well, the bride and groom had on floral coats. Rather, she had a floral coat and he had a coat made of ferns, Harlan. And I tried to differentiate between the male and female. And the ferns, because they have little spores on the back, I was sort of thinking that could that be the seed, whereas the floral, the flowers. So I was kind of playing around with that kind of imagery.
Okay.
And Queen Kane, it's my absolute favorite shape of coat, and I've never been able to put it on screen. And so I thought, no, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
And it's, of course, with everyone's approval. It's sort of a mishmash. It's a mashup of Fortuny and Leon Bakst. And it's this beautiful sort of 1911 to 20 shape. It's this very, and there's a large tassel at the back, and it had all these little chains on it that made noise. And then inside, when she opened up her arms, it was all painted by hand. And then, of course, we had to put fur. I have photographs of it that I do post on Instagram. Mm-hmm. I talk a lot about the costumes on the Instagram feed, and I break it down historically where it all comes from as well. So
definitely check it out. Is this the coat with the hoops?
No, this is just the Queen's wedding coat.
I see.
And then what I did with the lords and ladies, I tried to use textural fabrics. So that was mostly upholstery fabrics, also because we had to underdress them because it was so cold. Mm-hmm. So the fabrics have texture, and then the collars have texture. The hats had little bells. And then I was trying to think what would be left for the nobles to have that would be rare. And those only other things I could think of, one of the things I could think of is hoop skirts that are made out of metal and they don't disintegrate. So we made a bunch, and the women put it over their dresses because they wouldn't know to wear it under. And they were beautifully rusted up and shredded, and we had little bustles. So I kind of used 5 or 6 different shapes. It was great. Everybody liked it in the meetings, so we went ahead with it. And often I work in half scale, so we had that as the presentation.
Sure.
Yeah. And at first they were like, well, I don't know. And then we made a full scale, and then they're like, yeah, we like it. So
it's interesting how you added this haute couture element to a dystopian fashion sense that they would have, right? And that plays in really beautifully, and the construction that everything requires. And I'm sure you were using all kinds of like horsehair and boning all over the place. And
I have a lot of because of COVID, a lot of all our theaters and ballets shut down, of course, like everywhere across the world. So what I started doing is we have Stratford and Shaw, which are close to us, close-ish to Toronto, and then we had the National Ballet. And what I started doing is calling artisans from there. I had one of my cutters was the lead cutter for the National Ballet in Canada here. So and then I had 3 shoemakers on staff, which I've never had before, and it was so amazing. So and jewelry and crown, jewelry makers and armorers, and brilliant. It was just a brilliant assortment of people, leather workers.
So you have to be well versed in a lot of different aspects of design to pull this off, and then come to the shoemaker and say, hey, this is what I want to do. And then probably you had milliners as well, I'm sure.
Yes.
People.
Sure. I've actually done pretty much most of those things. I took millinery in school. It's not my favorite, but I understand it. Make a straw hat from scratch, weaving all the,
Yeah.
I still have the hat somewhere. Same with footwear. I've made footwear. I mean, obviously I'm not making Oxford shoes, but I have a very good understanding on how they're put together. Same with leatherwork. I've worked with leather. I'm also, I'm a cutter as well. So I understand construction of garments. And then particularly, I love the insides of the garments. And I always stress that all the garments have to be beautiful inside as well, because sometimes, even when you're in a rush, it's like, no. Take that apart, make it nicer. Don't just whip it in if we have the time, and I never want to see glue anywhere.
Oh no, such a no. Yeah, absolutely. And really the construction and the inside of the garment really makes the quality garment, right? Because if it's not beautiful on the inside, it's hard to be beautiful on the outside. I think that applies to a lot of things, actually.
Yes, exactly. There's actually a dress of Queen Kane's that we ended up stitching in a 1950s long line bra into. So it's
Wow.
yeah, because the back was very, very low and the shoulders were all like naked basically, and it was just a collar. Anyway, even Sylvia was surprised. She's like, "Oh, what's this?" I said, "Try it on." And she's so beautiful and she's an incredible figure. So this thing fit her like a dream. So
Nice.
yeah.
That's wonderful when that actually works out well, right?
Yeah.
Your characters that you're addressing actually fit well into the clothes.
Yeah.
So we had to talk about the Queen's outfits, of course. Tell us what cultures influenced these. Were they tribes? Can you elaborate on that, please?
I took a little bit of a lot of it's history, not tribal so much. What I tried to do with Sylvia is, Queen Kane, Sibith. What I tried to do with her is play with color with her.
Mm-hmm.
When we first see her, obviously, when the second season opens, she's been pulled from the silk farm, and she's sort of ratty looking. And then we see her in a dress. The next scene, the dressmakers are making her a dress because, of course, she's not going to run around in those clothing anymore. She's going to have and you can see the dress on the bottom. It starts to have an ombre of a reddish orange tint to it, and the top is white, of which we see her again with that same dress on, but then there's this orange coat that has crackled with gold in the back. I'm not sure how much of it we see in actual screen now, but it's sort of, you can see the cracks are starting to happen in her head, is sort of where that comes. And then the inside of the coat is sort of more reddish brown. And so what I start to do is I start to saturate her in the color of dried blood, because she has so much death on her hands. And revels in it to boot. So as you see, it gets more and more intense. And then at the very end, she's lying in a nightgown that almost looks like someone has washed out all the blood, but the stain is still there.
Sure.
So when she's tied up at the bed in the very end.
It's as if it becomes increasingly violent, right?
Exactly.
Even shown on her costume.
Yeah. And with Magra, what I tried to do is I kept her in blue tones. And she's more salt of the earth. She's more, she is, I don't know, natural is the wrong word, but she's more organic, more of the people, more, she'll get in there and help dig plants and that kind of a thing. So I've tried to keep her more in natural tones, and her blue tones start to intensify. And at the very last dress of hers that we see that's very queenly, she's actually tends to go into the greens. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like the tree has blossomed. So that's sort of where I went with that. And at the bottom of the dress, there's all these hand-stitched, I want to say twigs and vines and things of things having taken root and blossomed under her rule.
Wow. So you have a team of people basically hand-stitching all of the stuff at the bottom just to make it that unique outfit. Yeah. Wonderful. I love it.
I had, I think only 2 girls worked on that dress. I think only 2 did. One did the train and one did see what I did with all the costumes in the shop. Every costume went through 6 hands. Never one person made the whole thing by themselves. Somebody would do one layer of it. The other person would do the next. The other person, for example, like the leather cutter would cut the leather, then it would get hand stitched. Then it would go to the embellisher. Then it would get broken down. And it would dye would, more age. So you've got many hands. And of course, what I started to notice, because we were together so long, everyone is a forte of what they're really good at. Mm-hmm. So if I don't want to give someone a project and have them struggle, because that's not the exercise. The point of the exercise was to enjoy work. So I would be able to start to take the project and say, okay, thank you. And then I would give it to the person who's really good at embroidery. And then the other person who's really good at this, so it became this really nice symbiotic working, and nobody became possessive of their stuff, which was nice.
If you give people stuff that they excel at, at the end result will be excellent, right?
Exactly.
That really sounds wonderful, really. So let's put C to the side for a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about The Handmaid's Tale. Your experience with The Handmaid's Tale must have greatly prepared you for C. And as I mentioned before, you received 3 Primetime Emmy Awards nominations for the costumes, which are absolutely powerful and have an impactful meaning in our current times. Tell us what influenced the costumes, their style for this series. It is based on the novel, so did you heavily use it to draw inspiration when designing the characters' costumes?
Well, Margaret Atwood had sort of in her book laid out the parameters of all the colors, for example, the red and white for the girls, and then the commander wives the teal, and the commander's black, and the eyes navy, and so on. So we had a very tight box that we had to work in, which was completely the opposite of what C was. So it was a, I went from one to the other. I went out of the box, and then and this one was in the box. But in that box, I had still a lot of leeway because I could play with tailoring, tonality of color, just shapes in general. I mean, what I tried to do, for example, with Serena Joy and her arc of character and her psychology, where she was very depressed, the colors were very muted and flat, I want to say, and frumpy and wide. And as she started to get in strength, gain confidence and everything else, everything started to get closer to the body and sharp, and the shoulders became like really, tight.
Sure.
She would have knife pleats in her neckline that would echo on her arms and in the back. And because she was becoming sharp, and then at the very end, the very last teal outfit she's at her most brightest color because she's at her most powerful, thinking that she's going to finally dupe Commander Waterford. And in the end, she doesn't succeed doing that. So, but it's just, and it was a soft blouse, and it was all to entice him to do something, and it ends up failing anyway. And because she had the diagonal pleats in her skirt, the knife pleats. So
it was the razor sharp tailoring, right? Yeah, I definitely love the progression of the costumes, particularly for Serena's, and she's such a great actress as well. It's really a fascinating show, and the costumes are equally fascinating because you do have this sort of narrow window to play with. And every episode, you're like, oh, there's a variation on the teal. And this dress is a little bit flowy. And that one is more constrained. And there are these little jackets that they wear and so on. It's really impressive to see how you take it and you sort of morph it with the progression of the characters as their personality changes and reflecting their mood, right? There's a lot of psychology that goes involved with all of it.
Well, for example, Mrs. Lawrence is a prime example. She slides into dementia eventually. And a lot of us have witnessed, at least I have witnessed somebody going into that. And what ends up happening is you forget to change your clothes. You forget to wash your clothes. You forget. So what I did with her character is incrementally we made her dresses larger and larger, but very, very slight, not that it became a baggy dress the next day, and then the hemlines would just become a little more faded, a little darker. The necklines got a little darker, so it was very subtle. Sometimes I don't know. I'm not a fan of hit you over the head symbolism. So it was fun to play with that. And once I spoke to her about it, she was, yeah, let's do it. So it was, the devil is in the details, right? And that subtlety is what really draws you in without you noticing it. Because if it smacks you right in the face, you're like, oh, okay, now I'm supposed to feel this. But so when it's subtle, it sort of creeps up on you, and that's beautiful, really. So you came in as a costume designer for the show at a really interesting plot point in the series, the escape of some handmaids. What influenced the design of them re-entering freedom? I was trying to think about, I put myself in their shoes thinking, if I had just witnessed all this trauma and had to live through all this trauma and had all these horrible things happen to me, what would I do and how would I dress if I was suddenly given autonomy? First of all, I wouldn't know what to do, really. That's why one of the characters just appears in Handmaid, like something she's given, which is completely not, it doesn't even match. The colors clash. That was done on purpose. Eventually, she will go back into what she knew before, and that's what most people do. Is when they're trying to heal from trauma, often you'll go back to the time where your life was good. So things you wore, you'll gravitate towards that, and that's what I tried to do with the characters as well. So a little bit more muted, a little more subtle, and not so, not in your face. It was just very, and for example, like with Luke, he had his own trauma. He couldn't help his family. He was impotent basically in helping them. There's nothing he could do except gathering pictures and notices and trying to get people to back him. So his closet was extremely small because he wasn't thinking about what sweater he should wear today. He would probably put the same thing on all week just because his whole goal was to try and get his family back. It didn't matter the clothes and how did it match or,
Right. And it's such a traumatic environment. It's the last thing probably anybody is thinking, right? I just want to have my children back or,
Yeah, exactly.
So as a costume designer for season 3, can you tell us how the red robes evolved?
They didn't change too much because it would be very heavy-handed to come into a show and just suddenly say, okay, let's do it this way. So I had to maintain the subtlety of any kind of changes that did happen. The biggest change was the veil, and that was in Washington because I was trying to figure out how can we change this iconic outfit and add something to it that wouldn't detract from the rest of it, that would also keep it in its similarity of the seasons previous. The only real estate the girls had left literally was their face. And when they didn't have their capes on their necklines. So it being more of a pious society, I thought, well, let's cover them up some more, but I had to be very careful because it's a very fine line to tread without trying to offend anyone, any particular religion. So I kind of pulled from all religions and everyone got offended a little bit equally, if they were choosing to find offense in it.
Sure.
Just, there are archetypal shapes that, every religion has. There's a kippah, there's the nun's wimples, there's the hijab. So I tried to pull a little bit from everything. And the biggest thing with the veil for the handmaids, all that I could give them basically is take away their voice. That's all they really had left. Whispers, they could whisper and try and. Now, the good thing about Lizzie Moss is incredibly brilliant at acting with her eyes. So, her eyes. And then I left because I left the nose free as well, because you can actually be quite expressive with your nose, like flaring of nostrils. And so that gave actors a little bit to play with. Otherwise,
she also does. Yes.
Well, she also does. So, yeah. And in the back of them, there were big fur coat hooks, which had an audible snap when Aunt Lydia closed it on her. And that was sort of to ram home. They're like the snapping of the shackles. So they were chosen for their acoustic value, those hooks. Mm-hmm. So even though the fabric was quite light, but so that's how they changed there. It's again, there's only so many ways you can skin a veil, really. It's like
yeah, you have to play with this sort of sense of keeping conservative and also make it interesting for the viewers, right? And keep it exotic and keep us wanting more with the changes in the outfits. So we also had a chance to see more of the higher society through the galas and more intimate look at their home lives.
Yeah.
What made you choose that gorgeous emerald teal for the higher ups, for example? I
sort of thought, okay, because it's a more pious society, you could see in their everyday lives, the necklines were higher, the skirt lines were, the hemlines were a little lower. It was all just a little bit, very closed off, covered. So that I thought we could go the complete opposite end of the spectrum and make them peacocks, like as in peacock blue. So I thought, let's go for really bright, with the necks open and the hats and the gloves and the swirling. They had some of them had little hoop skirts under there as well. And we could play with it that way. We had to create 52 gowns in a matter of 2 weeks. And each one of them different, plus cast and the tailoring of all the suits. It was
no pressure.
No,
and they have to look amazing, of course.
It was crazy. We did basically I had 4 or 5 different bases cut, I want to say, shapes. We had an A-line, we had a straighter one, we had a poofier one, we had a sort of a waltz type dress, because we also had the dancers who waltzed. So we needed some. So what we did is we cut for those 52 dresses, let's say 5 of each shape, so that we had the bases done. And then we did all 52 fittings in one day. And then literally I had 4 girls come in at a time. This was obviously pre-COVID. And if it didn't fit her, I gave it to her. And, because of course, because the body types are different, right? Somebody will suit one shape better than another. So I didn't, because it was background, I didn't get to see them before that fitting. And it was a bit of a hairy day, but as soon as they were pinned, boom, they got altered. And then what we did is we dressed up a whole bunch of Judies, and the milliner was making flowers, and they were making little capelets and little scarves and shawls, etc., of different fabrics. And then we started decorating all the dress spaces, basically. And that's how we got to go through 52 dresses. And when the ladies saw the dresses to put them on that day, they were like, they're completely different. And I said, yeah, it was just an underdress.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Can you break down the large gala costumes for us? And that scene was fascinating. All the pieces looked really high fashion designer. Talk about that, please.
Thanks. Well, it was a lot of fun with the cast, particularly. We had the ladies had very different body shapes. So I did on one of them, who was quite tall and lean. She did a beautiful sort of 1930s bias dress. Another one I did more of a poofy ball gown. So there was different. Another one had sort of a 1920s velvet sheath on. Mm-hmm. And then Serena Joy, her dress was sort of also bias cut, sort of a little bit of an empire waist. And that was done for flow because she was dancing with Commander Waterford. Mm-hmm. They were doing a sort of a pseudo tango. So she had to have movement for her legs. And because Yvonne suits this amazing, she has such beautiful shoulders, the sort of boat neck.
Surely, yes.
Yeah, and I kept it a little plainer because I wanted it also to indicate that she didn't arrive in Washington with a ball gown packed in her suitcase, right? So it was pretty much made to order right then and there. So it's a little less is more. And also, you don't want to upstage the hostess, right?
No, that would be terrible.
No, sure. You don't want that.
Okay, well, wow, that's just incredible, Natalie. I'm fascinated by everyone's unique processes and creativity. I'd love to pick your brain some more about it, especially since you have a designer background. What is your creative process when you're signing on to a new project?
I get the script, of course, and I do several passes through it. First quickly, then I start to break it down. And then the last pass, I actually take each character separately and go through their arc, if we can have the arc. Mm-hmm. Luckily on C, I got all 8 scripts for both seasons mostly because of COVID. I've never block shot 8 episodes, which is kind of hairy, but wow. now I'm used to it. At first I thought, we're shooting 6 episodes in one day. That's great. Wow. Like different, but what happens is when you get that, I was treating it like a feature, basically chopped up into little pieces. Mm-hmm. And the only way to get around that, because it's daunting when you're handed this much script, is break it down. And then on a foam core board, I actually tape it, the whole progression of their scenes. And then I start to go into pulling little shapes, or I do little doodles of what it might be. And then that way I can start to also figure out their color schemes, depending on what's happening to them in the psychology.
Sure.
So that's one process. And then the other one is just to, basically just when you block shoot only 2 episodes at a time, you have to, go into what the psychology, and then I like to draw a lot from history. So right. Even if it's something modern.
Are you also perhaps going to museums and drawing inspiration from these different places, perhaps? And
absolutely. When I had been to the House of Fortuny in Venice before I had done, I did a fashion show, and I did some things from there, and I pull from things like that. Like, for example, I'll give you an example, a perfect example. On the last show, I was standing in. It was disgusting winter outside, muddy in a parking lot, and there was an oil slick in a big puddle. And then that became the theme of this one character whose name I can't tell you yet because she's in season 3 of C. And that became her whole entire motif of her whole arc was the oil slick coloring, that sort of goes that rainbow with the black and the ink. And there's a little yellow and purple and green. So
the iridescence, right? That's
yeah. I draw from anything really. I don't know. Sometimes, that just happens, or I see, buttons, or or I'll read a story. I'll like, for example, anything that I learned over the Iron Age during COVID that I didn't really know about beforehand. I could start pulling from all of that. I also read a lot of, I have a lot of websites that I read, so history nerd websites that,
Sure.
when they discover something new, like for example, there's footwear that were found in the bog people that are these sort of one piece of leather that you put one string to and you can tie it. That became the footwear of the handmaidens in the palace of C. So, it really, all because I had read some article about they'd found another bog man. So
You never know where inspiration is going to come from, right? It can be anything, this smallest little detail or anything really that's happening in your life. I draw a lot of inspiration from traveling, and right, I guess everybody's process is different, but I can definitely see where all that creativity comes from. It's really amazing. So the process must, for costume design, right, must have drastically changed with COVID-19. Can you talk to us about the challenges of building entire wardrobes of costumes with new COVID protocols in place? Have you learned to pivot as the head of an entire and crucial department with this era?
It was, it was interesting. I mean, the one good thing that came out of it, well, two good things, is the numbers went down in terms of 900 was no longer, and there are no last minute fly the guy in at 6 a.m. and put him on camera at 8:30. Which happened once only because of scheduling, which is daunting because you're scrambling then, right? You have to be incredibly organized and you have to plan it out. What happened is we had a core of background, for example, with the background numbers, and they all then eventually ended up getting a closet. So they each had all the army uniforms, each one in their size. Then they had a nobleman's outfit, they had a peasant's outfit, they had a, so they all had a closet. Same with the women. And we could pull from that. And when we needed to change them, we kept the base layers. Sometimes if we didn't have time, if we were just slammed with building so much, we would only then create on top the new costume, let's say, by layering things on top of it or removing things. So you can do a lot with that, or taking it and giving it a dye bath. So it was that, and you just had to be really organized. Like they're just.
Well, I think organization has to be crucial, especially when you're working with such sheer large amounts of both team members and actors, right? Talent.
Yeah.
How did you manage that? How did you do this day to day? Because, do you sleep?
Okay. So our shop runs 7 to 7 typically. That way you still can go see your family members at dinner, even though having to get up at 5 is pretty gross, but you eventually get into it and it just works. I start at 5 because I want to get ready for my day. That way, when everybody arrives at 7, they have their notes immediately. The cutters have all their notes. We have the plan for the day or for the week. And then, of course, on the weekends, I'll plan the week in a rough sense until I get the one-liner on Sunday night again, and to get to replan, the week. No, that's just normal. But yeah, and I would come in early and often what I would do also when I come in early is I'd walk around the room in very quiet time and just look at everything that's being built and put together. And then I can build on that, or we can change it or morph it, or I have new notes for that, or something came to me while looking at it, so it's that kind of a thing. It was, we had 4 costume shops, 2 of which were massive warehouses. The other 2 were side by side. 4 costume trucks, 3 costume trucks, and then I had a 4th that when we needed it. It was a constant. I just constantly walked around the room as we were building, and as things started to develop, we could see, pull back from that, don't go there, or this looks too much like that, so it was very busy, and I don't even know right now how we did it, to be honest.
Looking back, right? With COVID, it seems like we've come to appreciate all the little things, right? So I also have to ask, since you were really designing for all these different mediums, theater, opera, film, television, has there been any costumes in your entire career that have meant the most to you, and why?
I think that comes back to probably my very first projects, and probably the last one just because of the creativity. The first one because you've got that adrenaline and it's my first thing, and and I still have pieces from that, and I look at it now and I kind of go, oh, but but yeah, it's
sure.
Again, I'm looking at my own arc, which is pretty amazing in terms of not that I'm so amazing, but how much I've grown.
Yeah.
I see how much I've grown, and that to me, I never would have thought, put it that way.
Yeah, it's that evolution, right? When you start
Yeah.
looking at the early things that you make. I don't know. I've kept a lot of my earlier stuff as well.
Yeah.
And I look at that, and then I look at the things that I make now, and I was like, wow, this is such a big difference.
Yeah.
It's such a great feeling, right? It's rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you feel like you've actually grown, which is, we all strive for that all the time. And, you don't see it because it's an everyday thing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're coming to the end of our show, Natalie, and we like to talk about how people get started, and training is so important, right, in this field. Can you tell us about how the next generation of designers can prepare for a career in the costume design industry?
I think it's great that when you come out of school, having learned to be a designer, don't expect the designer job right when you get out of school. Be humble enough to do all the jobs, because there's so much that you're not taught in school at all.
Absolutely.
That is crucial to getting through the job. And most of it is actually just management of people, like how to interact with people, whether that goes with actors or your crew members. Don't be humble enough to sweep the floor, clean out the sink, or, rethread the machines, or do it all. Learn everything. Don't shy away from anything, and always ask, what can I do? Don't say I got nothing to do. Always say, what can I do? Is there something I can do? That's why sometimes can you help sweep the floor because we're drowning in stuff or whatever,
I can totally relate to that. Just some younger designers that I know, people that are still in school, emerging designers, they, a lot of people, even I myself thought it, when I got out of fashion design school, okay, I'm a designer now. I can just go in and be the creative director and tell everybody what to do, but it doesn't work that way. You have to sort of know all of the basics and sweep the floors and make sure that the tables are clutter free before you can go on to become John Galliano, I guess.
It's very, because I went to school in Europe, and I'm European by birth, but so I had very harsh schooling. And I remember being an assistant designer and kind of a little cocky, and I was handing pins to the designer as she was pinning the dress. And at one point I wasn't paying attention because I was like, oh God, that kind of thing. And I handed the pin the wrong way to her. She grabbed a pin and stuck me with it. And she said, you'll never do that again, will you? And I just went, oh my God, that's old school. That's old school. Not hard, but she stuck me with it, just to make me like pay attention. And that's the biggest thing. Pay attention. See everything that's going around you. Don't feel like, oh God, I'm handing her pins. Pay attention to what's going on in the fitting. Watch how she's pinning it. Watch how she's convincing the actress that she's looking good in it, and the suggestions that she's making. Look at that and keep that and store it, because you'll need that eventually.
Yeah, you'd have to inspire your talent and tell them you look great in this. You feel confident in this so that you can really turn into that person, to that character. And at the end of the day, that's what the costume designer is, right? You are creating characters. And if you can assist the talent into believing it and becoming it, that's so important, right?
And I mean, even just being able to explain what your choices are and explaining it properly without sounding, flippant or glib about it. Be thoughtful and think about your words and how you say it, and pay attention to all of the stuff you're seeing around you, because you will store that and it'll come. I mean, I use it every day now, all the stuff I learned just being beside other designers.
I believe that for costume design, you have to be a little bit fearless, but B, you also have to be willing to do all the jobs that are on the table, because there are a lot of jobs. And it could be just returns or shopping or creating or whatever it is. And you have to really rotate through all of those jobs just to know what you're talking about and the time it takes to do all of these things and the cost.
Yes. Well, for example, I mean, in IATSE, we had very few people who were agers and dyers when I came in. And that's actually how the first few jobs I had, I was sanding motorcycle jackets on a hot asphalt parking lot in the summer.
I've been there, actually.
Very exciting. with a palm sander. And the designer liked the fact that I didn't complain about it and I just did it. And when I was done, I said to her, are there more? Is there anything else I can do for you? And then she looked at me, she goes, who are you? And I ended up staying on the show for the entire run of the show. And I was only a daily. So like I showed up just there for that day because she needed somebody to break down some jackets. So, and then I ended up working with her for 6 years. So
That's the way it happens.
That's how it happens. Is there anything else I can do for you? Never, that's always the magic phrase I find. And I've mentored other people too. When I see that they have, self-starter qualities, then you keep giving them a little bit more, and if it's wrong, people make mistakes. It's not a big deal. People shouldn't come down on you to the point where they're going to behead you.
No.
So yeah. That's mentorship. You must pass it on.
And it's so necessary. It's such a hard industry to get in. And it's always nice to like be with somebody and help them grow and take them sort of by the hand and say, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. And maybe a little slap on the wrist every now and then, but that's it. So can you talk to us about other upcoming exciting projects that you have in the works for 2022?
I can't yet. Sorry.
I'm sure you have lots of secrets for the next year. Where can so I wanted to touch on Edith because I do find it fascinating. I was looking at your recent runway and I was blown away. I love this kind of stuff. And it definitely belongs in Paris Fashion Week. Talk to us about that, your process, and because this is your passion, right? You do it on the side because you love it.
Yeah, I do it as a, for me, I treat it as an art project. I've been lucky enough to be able to do that because most people can't, because it's very costly to put together a show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's that's why I do a show. I do a film, and then I can do a fashion show because otherwise I couldn't. It's just the cost is great. But I did it initially because I was assisting a lot, and I hadn't been designing very much in cinema, so I would do those things so I could have complete freedom and just get that out of my system. Because of course you're working for other people, so you must, you're there to enhance what they're doing, not your own thing.
Right.
So I ended up doing this sort of as a cottage industry, and then I would build these one-off pieces. And I have sort of a clientele occasionally like, oh, I need a party dress. So and it's a lot of fun. A lot of these are ladies who've traveled a lot, and sometimes they would just give me their fabrics too that they purchased just because they're kind of like us, I just had to have it. I don't know what I need it for, but I had to have it. So can you make something?
If you're anything like me, you have stacks and stacks of fabric that will see the light of day, or at least we tell each other that they will.
Behind my bedroom door, I can't even close it because all the rolls of fabric fall on me.
I know. For me, it's all folded up with leather and all kinds of different things. And I will get to it, I promise.
Yeah, same.
Natalie, it's been really great talking with you. Can you tell us where our viewers can follow you on social media?
Yeah, I really only do one because I'm actually kind of busy and sometimes I can't even keep up with that one, but it's on Instagram. Okay. And there I on usually the projects that I work on, I will break down the costumes for people. I've been a little remiss in the last little while because I just got a puppy. So, but yeah, it's a bit busy there. But yeah, it's at Bronfman Nata is the
handle.
It's my handle. And come see me there. You can scroll, and if you go further in, you can see all the Handmaid stuff because that was previous. Mm-hmm. But and I've got over 28,000 pictures from season 3 alone. So there's lots coming.
Wonderful. So excited. Well, thank you very much. We also want to thank our sponsor, Gianni Inc., the most reliable studio service resource for men's clothing to the entertainment industry with over 25 years and over 500 productions served. Gianni Inc. is the suit finder of Hollywood. If he can't find it, no one can. Thank you to our guest costume designer, Natalie Bronfman, for coming on the show. It's been wonderful talking with you. We also want to thank our producer and founder, Martika Ibarra, and co-founder, costume designer, Marilyn Vance. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on all podcast platforms. Follow me, your host, Sylvester Centina, at Sylvester Centina on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.